All right, welcome to another installment of the Fragments of Silicon reviews. 3 reviews up this week, entirely of which because Gollix is currently without power. Apparently, he suffered a tremendous ice storm yesterday, I want to say, or perhaps this morning. Point is, most of his town is without power, and power isn't expected to be restored until Wednesday. So, yeah. Also, I suppose another thing to mention is apparently Mac is without power.
For an entirely different reason.
Yeah. And he doesn't know when the power's coming back on. So there are a distressing amount of people on staff who are without power right now. But that is a topic for Wednesday, one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
For now, we have games to get through. First one here is Nightshade, aka Nightshade 1992, aka Nightshade for the NES, aka its full title, Nightshade Part 1, The Claws of Sutekh. And clearly it's a title that was feeling bold in its proclamations because, this is the actual title. They called themselves Chapter 1 out the gate, which is always a awkward thing to do because there's, unless you're a super successful franchise already, Pokemon the first movie, you could say it was a bit presumptive for kids, WB would have you to go with that title, but Pokemon was already a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah, I was going to say, Pokemania was already well underway at that point.
And 2, there were already other Pokemon movies by the time that Pokemon, the first movie, came out.
I think they were just finishing movie 2 in Japan as 1 was releasing in US, if I recall correctly.
So, a lot less arrogant than something like Nightshade here, calling itself Chapter 1. Because, surprise, surprise, there was no Chapter 2. So, now it just gets to be one of, literally 4 titles called Nightshade in the world. But putting that aside, Nightshade is an interesting title from the NES era, as you might be seeing here, because it's not a typical genre you would find on the NES, but not an unfamiliar one. It is a point-and-click adventure game, and point-and-click adventure games did very occasionally make it to the NES. Probably most famous are the ports of the Mac Venture trilogy, Shadowgate, Deja Vu, The Uninvited, and the NES port of Maniac Mansion. The first, technically the second, but we do not have time to get into that. Basically, the first LucasArts, Lucasfilm adventure game of note. But this game differs from those in a few key areas. First of all, it's not a port. This isn't a game that was first released on, the Amiga or DOS or any computer platform you could name from the time. This is a game that was wholesale developed for the Nintendo Entertainment System. I don't know why exactly. Maybe to stand out from the crowd, because once again, if you were developing a platformer or a top-down shooter, you were coming up against some pretty stiff competition, especially when this game was released. as it's one of the later NES releases, debuting in North America in 1992, which may give you a clue as to why this game didn't do so hot. Like, because, once again, it was still fairly viable to release a NES game in 1992, but, 1992 is also when the 16-bit wars are really getting started. Yeah. Like, the Super NES is on the shelves of Japan and North America. I believe it hits Europe in 1992.
Mm-hmm.
And the Genesis is well established in all three major video gaming regions.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, the NES and, if you're in Europe, the Master System were popular enough where you still got development support. And that also speaks to, this game was probably conceived of in 1991. Like, maybe 1990. Like, your average dev cycle in the 8-bit days was, let's say, a lot shorter than it was even, like, a few generations typically. The point is, the turnaround time was enough to have it show up on the NES in 1992, but not on the Super Nintendo in 1992. Because, the NES, despite its age, is still a well-established product. And, developers knew how to work that system, as opposed to the Super Nintendo, which was new, and I won't say like documentation was poor or anything like that, but, developers would still have to get to grips with the system versus the NES at this point. So that's why you still got a fair amount of support in, like, 1992 all the way up to 1994. So those are a couple of explanations. Another one here is this is a completely original IP. It's not and it's not an IP from a major developer or publisher. Like, it's not coming from, say, Sierra or LucasArts or I mentioned this game on the program in an interview recently, Tombs and Treasure. That was a completely original NES game, but that showed up a bit earlier, like I think 1990, 1991, still in, prime NES territory, and that was developed by Infocom, if I'm remembering correctly, which was maybe not a big player in the point-and-click adventure game, but they were a pioneer in interactive fiction, completely text-based stuff. The point is, that still had an established name. Nightshade here came to us via Beam Software. And this, I'm not sure if this is like the first time they were ever acknowledged as a developer, but it's one of the first times. Because Beam Software actually did quite a bit of NES development. Like, some of it good, like Super Smash TV comes to mind. Sorry, no, Smash TV. Super Smash TV is for the Super Nintendo. They did the NES version. On the other hand, they are responsible for the absolutely dreadful Back to the Future Part 2 and 3. I talked about this recently as well. A lot of these contract developers were only as good as the publisher they worked for. Like, Back to the Future Part 2 and 3 came to us via LJN. Like, so, we weren't exactly batting high with that one. Whereas, like, though surprisingly Smash TV came out okay, even though I think that was a claim. Anyway, so Beam Software, this is maybe their first original title, at least on the NES. Chance to break out into more, not just more ambitious things, but more original works. Didn't seem to take, at least not here. And strangely enough, this game was picked up by Konami's Ultra Games label, who is just beginning to outlive their usefulness in 1992. Mainly because on the Super Nintendo, Nintendo did away with the 5 games per year restriction that had beguiled the NES and apparently even the Game Boy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there was actually, point is, 1992, this is when Ultra Games begins to wind down. As in, we see the final games from the Ultra Games label in this year. So that probably also means not a whole lot of advertising resources are provided to Nightshade, or really anything that they released in 1992, as opposed to like the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, or Metal Gear, their version of Skate or Die, Defender of the Crown, and so on and so forth. So, with that in mind, now if you've been paying attention to the footage on screen here, you might also note that the game plays a little bit differently than other adventure games on the system. Now what we got here, the actual adventure game portion, that closely mirrors Maniac Mansion. There are a few differences in that you can select, you have to pause and, you select the verb from a menu. Now, granted, I'm not exactly sure if that's how it works. The NES version of Maniac Mansion, I never played that game on the NES.
Okay. We have more respect for ourselves than to play NES Maniac Mansion.
It's not necessarily that. I mean, I wasn't a stranger to adventure games on the Nintendo. It's just my cup of tea was Shadowgate and the Mac Adventure games, which control, a lot more traditionally. They actually brought the full point-and-click interface to the game. Anyway, you might want to approach this guy here in order to get into the big departure of what Nightshade does versus other adventure games on the system. Yeah, you go into the action.
And immediately get my ass kicked.
Right. And you get into one of the death traps. Yeah, so these are the big differentiators to what other adventure games were doing. You can certainly die in this game. That was, that was par for the course for the point and clicks, even on PC. Outside of Lucas was just beginning to challenge that system. Because we did have the Monkey Island games by this point, and so on and so forth. Sierra is very much still loving to kill you. But once again, this game operates on a different wavelength. In terms of the action sequences, they're full on action. You can jump, you can freely jump and punch, and it maneuvers like an actual action game. The problem is we're dealing with a Western developer, which may be a quizzical statement, but how do I put this? Western studios just could not finesse the NES like Japanese studios could. Because the action sequences feel very awkward, stiff, and unresponsive. They're not good. They're not fun. I'm like, once you get used to them, you can, finesse them. But they were not sequences I ever looked forward to. And you will be doing the action a lot, not just with like the low level Guild of Unreasonable Gentlemen. That's literally what the blue Derby wearers are called. But, this game also differs in the sense that it has bosses. 5 of them. Obviously the bosses are going to be more difficult. Now, because we are covering the Steam version, also worth noting, this game, and you might be surprised to learn this, is also on the Nintendo Switch Online service. So what does that mean? Well, on Steam, it means save states. Yep, you can cheese the battles if you so wish. I.e., you manage to successfully, let's say, do your triple combo on an enemy, and they're laying down, hit the pause button, and you save. I did this because, once again, these, even fighting the henchmen can be brutal, and you will get taken out fairly quickly. And that ties into another core mechanic, and probably some of the worst egregious offenses this game did back in the day. Because once again, if you've seen Petty Fan's performance here, he's gotten his ass kicked quite a few times, and has been regulated to the death traps. So the death trap system was apparently something they came up to overcome the principal weakness of this game back in the day, but it's not so much a problem now. And that is, this game has no save system. And that is something that affected the entire game design. Because this game is completely non-linear outside of confronting Sutekh himself. The 4 underbosses, you can confront in any order you can. Because, once again, no save system. And the death trap mechanics, according to Wikipedia, were apparently drawn up in response to not having a save system. I do not know why they did not have a save system here. I'm like, okay, you didn't want to have a battery backup? It's goddamn 1992. Passwords were well part of the NES scene by then.
Oh yeah, they've been around for 6 or 7 years at that point?
Maybe not that long, but the point is, 1992, there was no excuse to not having a save system in this game.
Yeah, especially for something this long.
Yeah, because I believe it's been calculated, this is the biggest adventure game on the NES.
Mm-hmm.
It is quite large for an NES game. I forget, the number of, actual rooms, but it is significantly bigger. I do know it's significantly bigger than a Maniac Mansion on the NES, or, on the PC, because content issues aside, all of the rooms were brought intact to the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, that flaw is mitigated by the fact that you have save states with the modern versions of the game. So, you don't have to play or suffer through this in one sitting. Now, the thing about the death trap system is you can think of it as your lives, and you only have a limited amount of them. And the thing about it is they increase in difficulty in regards to your success. As in, the first 2 death traps aren't particularly difficult to get out of. You just have to know the timing. Also, if you get to that again, Petty, the trick to that isn't your hand, it's your foot. Your foot has to be aligned with the left lever. Yeah, this game also has what I would generously call adventure game bullshit. That right there is pure, undistilled adventure game bullshit.
The thing on the screen makes my brain hurt, and I hate it.
Let me see. Yeah, this game is also kind of a comedy.
Comedy, air quotes.
This is literally a King's Quest 4 joke. Anyway, the trick to opening this is to go and hit the other lever, which is behind the painting in the where the Derby wearer is at. You have to operate it, I believe.
Oh, it would have been nice if they told me I could fucking operate those.
Well, anyway, your introduction to the game is a baptism in explosions in regards to the health system and the trap system. You have to move away from the bomb, and then you use the candle to escape. Also, do not walk in the center.
Little late.
Yeah, I know. Stupid lag.
Yeah.
Anyway, getting back to the death traps. Also, you will need to use the screwdriver on those screws.
What screws?
Those screws those are the screws on the floor there. Examine them and they'll tell you screws. Well, once again, remember, we're working with NES levels of resolution here. So it might be hard to identify things unless you identify them.
I just thought those were just pieces of tile, you know?
I know, they're not. Yeah. Anyway, point is, the death traps get more elaborate, more difficult, up to the fourth one, where you actually need an item to escape. You need to have a piece of food in order to get a rat to choose through your bonds. And then you get death trap number 5, which is the inescapable death trap. You get locked into the chamber where you get frozen. There's no way to escape that. You're dead, or as good as dead. It's game over permanently there. So essentially, you have 4 lives. If you can work the death traps. Now, which is, on the one hand, a creative exploration of, video game lives. I'll give them, and adventure gaming, I'll give them credit for that. Minus a zillion points for implementation. Because, once again, it's all dogged by adventure game bullshit. You have to make sure you're at the proper place, at the proper time, in the developer's mind. And, once again, going back to the first death trap, it counterintuitively using the foot instead of your hand. Because that's like your second instinct, not your first.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they probably knew that. Which is, once again, the kind of shit adventure game programmers sometimes did. Yeah, sometimes they were just working on their own lines of logic. Sometimes they just deliberately wanted to kill you. Now, tying into the final system here, health. Recovering health is a bit of a sticky wicket in and of itself. There are a few ways to recover health. One is if you escape the death traps, you will have full health again. but you might want to save one of those for strategic reasons, or like getting out of a long area, like the sewers come to mind. Like, point is, see also the help, because at the central location, i.e. Vortex's secret lair. Vortex, by the way, is the superhero who preceded you, who dies. And credit to Nightshade for getting some stuff under the censorship eyes of Nintendo, or maybe they weren't looking as hard in 1992, because they acknowledge that Vortex gets killed and you will come across his body.
Fine.
Yeah, which once again wasn't a very common occurrence in 1991. Granted, there are other adventure games that I could cite where they got away with a lot more than I thought they would ever get. Looking at you, Shadowgate. Looking at you, Uninvited. So, for whatever reason, there are a few things that are a bit more adult than your typical Nintendo Entertainment System package. I suppose the biggest thing that got past the censors was you are able to open a curtain and see a lady changing, which is a thing that you would think Nintendo would have put the axe down, but they might not have caught it.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, that's what happened with the hamster in Maniac Mansion.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, point is, you can restore your health 4 times to maximum using the recharge station. And if you get food, it will recharge your health depending on what you eat, I think. Or maybe it's just a bar in general. The maximum of which is there is this joke referencing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Once again, this is a game that came out in 1992, so it's actually got a few references to the Turtles in it. You need help with something else, Petty?
I'm just kind of waiting for this to be over. I've had my fill.
If you wanted to figure out how to open the grate, you use the crowbar.
I tried, it wouldn't let me.
I'm like, did you use the crowbar?
Yes.
That's weird because it should allow you. Anyway, the point is, I will give another bit of credit. The puzzles in and of themselves are fairly logical. You will seldom be scratching your head as long as you know what is what. The problem is really more in the actual mechanics. Once again, in order to get up towards a cat, I had to operate the ladder instead of use the ladder. That might be the problem you were facing, Petty. It's particular about the verbs sometimes. So, yeah. And yeah, you are past the initial place. I'm gonna think of and that's pretty much the entire game in terms of its mechanics and so on and so forth. Now, how does it all come together? So I suppose we do have to look at that in two different contexts. 1992 NES context and the modern day context. Like in 1992 terms, this game is actually fairly inventive. Because once again, this was an adventure game that they made for this system, the Nintendo Entertainment System, and they had to work around the limitations therein. It's like the thing is, they didn't have to include the action sequences, but perhaps they were afraid that their puzzles were a bit too simplistic to carry an entire adventure game, which isn't a great sign given that you're an adventure game and puzzles are kind of your actual bread and butter, not combat. Then again, I have yet to know an adventure game that did combat well. Like, not even the Indiana Jones games did that. At least in my estimation. I know there are people who actually like that shit, but not I. In modern game terms, this does make this an interesting curio. Now, especially since you can look up guides and stuff. I won't deny I did that because, on the scale of unforgiving adventure games, it's definitely higher than, say, post Monkey Island and LucasArts, but definitely less than Sierra. Oh, Sierra. How you loved killing people. Like, overall, it's a solid enough effort, and the emulation prospects are enough to surmount some of the problems, but I don't think it's going to get over some of the other fundamental flaws I've gone over. So give it I'd say a slightly below average, in my view. Petty, anything you want to add to that?
Not really. Like, this definitely isn't my cup of tea.
Anyway, in terms of pricing, so this is where things get interesting, because it is on Steam, clocking in at a pretty typical Pico price of $8.99. I think that's way too much for it. Wait for a sale where it's goes for like $3.74 or something like that. That's how much I'd pay. Now, on the NES, on the Nintendo Switch, I think I mentioned this in passing, but this game is part of the Nintendo Switch Online service, and the one that comes with the base tier. It's an NES title. So if you're plugged into that, you can play for no extra charge. Obviously this isn't a game you would ever plug into the service for. It's an interesting curio that happens to be there to, I guess, diversify the lineup.
And I guess that one might be a little bit better because it does have the actual rewind feature, not just save states.
Yeah, and these Ratmen are another TMNT reference.